You are a Roman guard standing outside a heavy sealed stone chamber in the heart of Alexandria. The Egyptian sun beats down on the palace walls, but here in the corridor, the air is thick with the scent of cedar oil and the silent tension of history in the making. Inside that room is Cleopatra, the seventh of her name, the Queen of Egypt, the Pharaoh of the Nile, and the last descendant of the Ptolemies. She is arguably the most powerful woman the ancient world has ever seen, yet she has been locked behind these doors for 7 long days. From your post you hear her. It isn't the sound of frantic crying or the high-pitched screams of a broken woman. Instead you hear movement, the soft, deliberate rhythm of footsteps on polished stone, the faint, haunting rustle of expensive silk, and occasionally her voice. She speaks with a low, commanding cadence as if addressing an invisible court, though you know with absolute certainty that she is entirely alone in that cold, silent room. Before we go any further into the darkness of that chamber, there is something fundamental you need to understand about the death of Cleopatra. Almost everything you think you know about her final moments is a carefully constructed lie. The romanticized story of the Egyptian queen, clutching an asp hidden in a basket of sun-ripened figs, is likely nothing more than poetic fiction designed to soften a brutal reality. The image of Cleopatra dying peacefully upon her royal bed, draped in gold and surrounded by her weeping, loyal handmaidens, is almost certainly a myth. What actually occurred inside those sealed chambers between August 1st and August 12th, 30 BC, was something far more deliberate, far more calculated, and far more revealing about the ruthless manner in which Rome dismantled its enemies. This is not a simple story of tragic suicide. It is the account of a systematic psychological operation, a psyop in modern terms, designed to break the last pharaoh of Egypt before allowing her to finally perish. The real question we must ask is not how Cleopatra died, but rather why Octavian, the man who would become Augustus, needed her to die in such a specific, controlled way. Why did he need 10 long days to make it happen? Why not execute her immediately as a rebel and a traitor to the Roman cause? If understanding how power operates at its most controlled, calculated, and terrifying levels matters to you, then consider subscribing to this channel. Script Historians exists to expose the hidden mechanisms of domination and the cold logic of empire that shaped ancient civilizations in ways that romanticized history books often prefer to ignore. Let me pull back the curtain on the propaganda and show you exactly what transpired during Cleopatra's final 10 days of life. The destruction of the Queen of Egypt did not begin with a snake bite. It began on the first day of August 30 BC, as the world she had built began to crumble into the dust of the desert. Inside the massive ornate tomb that Cleopatra had built for herself near the Temple of Isis, Mark Antony was dying. He had fallen upon his own sword in a fit of despair after being falsely informed that Cleopatra had already taken her own life, but she was still breathing. She had barricaded herself inside that solid stone structure, in a 2-story fortress with massive wooden doors and no easy points of entry. She was surrounded by her 2 most loyal handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, and as much royal treasure as they could carry, gold, jewels, and precious resins that Octavian desperately coveted to pay his legions. Antony, bleeding out and fading fast at the base of the tomb, was hauled upward by ropes through a high window by the 3 women. According to Plutarch, his blood smeared the white stone walls as they strained to pull his weight into the upper chamber. He died in Cleopatra's arms, believing his life had meaning because he was a Roman, defeated only by another Roman, unaware of the trap closing in. Cleopatra had only a few precious minutes to grieve before the forces of Octavian surrounded her sanctuary. However, Octavian did not order his men to storm the tomb or break down the barricaded doors. He was a master of patience and a strategist of the mind. Instead, he sent a messenger, Proculaeus, with a simple, disarming request. Caesar wished to discuss the terms of her surrender, and more importantly, the future of her children. Cleopatra, ever the diplomat, refused to open the doors. She negotiated through a narrow gap in the stone, demanding guarantees for her children's safety. While she was distracted by the dialogue, Proculaeus's men scaled the outer walls using ladders. They entered through the same high opening used to pull the dying Antony inside just hours earlier. They took her by surprise, disarming her before she could use a hidden dagger. As they seized her, she screamed, "You will not take me alive! You will not parade me!" But the soldiers had explicit orders: keep her alive at all costs. The moment they carried her from the tomb and sealed her inside the guarded chamber on the second floor of the palace, the true process of destruction began. Octavian did not simply want Cleopatra dead, he needed her alive for a very specific purpose. Egypt was the wealthiest kingdom in the world, and it was now his, but back in Rome, he faced a massive PR problem. He had just concluded a brutal civil war, Romans killing Romans. To justify the bloodshed, he had to transform a conflict between citizens into a war against a foreign other. He needed a villain. Cleopatra was the perfect candidate. The Eastern temptress, the Egyptian witch, the foreign corruption that had seduced a noble Roman general. But there was a problem. Cleopatra was brilliant, multilingual, and highly respected by many in the Roman elite. She wasn't a caricature. Complicated enemies make for poor propaganda. Octavian needed to simplify her, to turn her into a trophy that could be paraded through the streets of Rome. Octavian's entire political future depended on the spectacle of the Roman triumph. This was a ritualized formula of humiliation, where a defeated king or queen was led through the streets in chains, displayed to the jeering crowds, and then publicly strangled in the Mamertine prison. Cleopatra understood this formula all too well. She had been in Rome years earlier during Julius Caesar's triumphs and had watched as Vercingetorix, the Gallic king, was dragged through the mud and then executed. She knew that Octavian intended to use her body to solidify his grip on the Roman soul. Thus, the next 10 days became a battle of wills. Octavian's strategy was to break her desire for death. He needed to make her want to live, and to do that, he used the only leverage she had left, her 4 children. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, and the 3 younger children she had with Antony were separated from her and placed under heavy guard in different parts of the palace. On August 2nd, Octavian sent a different kind of messenger, Gaius Cornelius Gallus, a poet and diplomat who spoke the language of refinement. The message was refined cruelty. Your children are safe for now, but their survival depends entirely on your cooperation. If you die, Caesar cannot guarantee their lives. Cleopatra was trapped in an impossible psychological space between her dignity and her motherhood. To escalate the pressure, Octavian sent architects to her chamber on August 3rd. They didn't come to talk. They came with measuring rods and wax tablets. They measured her height, the width of her shoulders, and the weight of her frame. When she asked what they were doing, they replied with cold indifference, "The display for the triumph must be built to accommodate your dimensions." They were measuring her like a piece of furniture, preparing the cage she would occupy in Rome. They returned every day for nearly a week, discussing her humiliation in front of her, as if she were already a statue. This was systematic conditioning. While the architects measured her for her cage, other messengers brought reports about her children. They told her how Caesarion was asking for her, how the younger children were crying for their mother. They let the sounds of her children playing in the palace gardens drift through her narrow window, close enough to hear their laughter, but far too far to touch. Modern psychologists call this learned helplessness. By stripping her of agency and making her dependent on him for news of her loved ones, Octavian was attempting to dismantle her identity. By August 7th, Cleopatra stopped eating, choosing the slow death of starvation. Octavian didn't force-feed her. He simply brought her eldest son, Caesarion, to her room. The boy begged her to eat, telling her he needed her to survive so they could all be safe. That night, she ate, and the threat to her children was no longer a theoretical concept. It had a face and a voice. On August 8th, Octavian finally visited her in person. He offered a mercy. If she walked willingly in the triumph, without chains, he would spare all her children, including Caesarion. It was a brilliant lie. Caesarion, as the biological son of Julius Caesar, was a direct threat to Octavian's legitimacy. Octavian could never let him live. For 3 days, Cleopatra lived in the agony of hope. But on August 11th, something shifted. Whether she overheard the guards or received a secret message from a loyalist, she finally understood the truth. Octavian was going to kill Caesarion, regardless of what she did. The negotiations were theatre. The promises were hollow. Her cooperation would not buy her children's safety. It would only buy her own public degradation. With this realization, her path became clear. She requested permission to visit Antony's tomb one last time to offer libations. Octavian, believing he had broken her spirit, granted the request. Under heavy guard, she entered the tomb. The soldiers watched her pray, but they didn't see her retrieve the small clay vial of poison she had hidden there days earlier. When she returned to her palace chamber, she was calm. She requested a final meal, including a basket of fresh figs. The guards checked the basket for daggers, but found only fruit. They didn't realize that the snake wasn't in the basket. The venom was already in her possession. On the morning of August 12th, the guards opened the door to find a scene of silent defiance. Cleopatra was dead. Dressed in her full royal regalia, he's reclining on a golden couch.